In today's video, we're taking a look at some more NHL trade rumors, this time focusing on teams like the New York Rangers, the Montreal Canadiens, as well as the Columbus Blue Jackets, and we have the NHL handing out some more hardware. We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. So as I mentioned today, we're taking a look at three teams and some trade speculation of things we might see here in the near future. Of course, the NHL trade market has started slowly to heat up a little bit. And as I mentioned in the video I put out last night about the Montreal Canadiens Carolina Hurricanes trade, it's a sign of things to come here. Obviously, there's not too many teams left in the NHL playoffs. Things are happening. Conversations are taking place. I know I've seen several comments from NHL GMs saying that they're having a lot of conversations. This flat salary cap is going to have a major impact on a lot of teams and I think cause a lot of player movement. It does make things more challenging for teams, but they need to be creative in how they go about this to make sure their teams are best prepared for next season. We're not that far away now from the NHL Draft and Free Agency. We're less than a month away from the draft. We're just obviously just a little bit less than a month away from free agency too. So you're going to see teams get themselves positioned so they have cap space for free agency as well as use their draft currency to make acquisitions ahead of the draft. So by the time they get there, they kind of already know what they're using for picks instead of trades. So now let's jump into the NHL handing out some more hardware last night with the NHL acknowledging Lou Lamoriello as the general manager of the year. Now, Tampa Bay Lightning GM Julian Breezeball was the runner-up, but Lamoriello's obviously done a pretty significant job with the Islanders. Ever since he's been there, they've come back into contention, been in the playoffs for a few years in a row now, and of course they're in the Eastern Conference Final. So I think Lou's done a terrific job, but he's certainly going to have his work cut out for him this offseason, so we'll see just how good he can be at balancing the books and the flat salary cap and how that's all going to be affected here when they have a big significant contract and Matthew Barzal, who's a restricted free agent, going to need to be re-signed this offseason, going to be looking for big bucks. The Isles don't have a ton of cap space, so they're going to have to be creative in how they do that, as well as defenseman Ryan Pulock also needs a new deal as well. So the Isles are going to have to be creative, and we'll see just how good he is at his job this offseason as well. But overall, I think Lou's had a terrific career. Someday I wouldn't even be surprised if this award was renamed after him. He's been a GM in the NHL and successful for such a long period of time. So congratulations to Lou Lamoriello. And again, we'll see how he does this offseason because he's got his work cut out for him. Now, jumping into today's trade rumors, let's kick things off with the New York Rangers. Now, the Rangers are going to be a very interesting team to watch. Today's information comes again from the New York Post and Larry Brooks, discussing how they very well could have a player like Tony DeAngelo on the trade market, gauging his interest for a couple of reasons. For one, the Rangers, like many teams, are going to be tight on cap space. Tony DeAngelo had a terrific year again last year in a one-year contract. Going to be looking for a significant raise, and he's going to be looking for more term after signing a one-year contract. Most of these players are going to be looking for term if they can get it. Now, of course, some players acknowledge they're going to have to be more reasonable with the fact that some of these teams are going to be a little gun-shy here to give out too much term to players who are not considered to be absolute top players. But in the case of DeAngelo, he's had a couple of back-to-back seasons now with some really solid offensive numbers. I know in his defensive zone, he's not the greatest, but either way, no matter how you shake things longer term, he's the third best right shot defenseman in the Rangers organization behind Jacob Trouba and Adam Fox. So do they want to pay him $5 to $6 million to be a third pair defenseman? Probably not. So as much as he's been a pretty good offensive force for them, it's difficult to see how he has a long-term future with the Blue Shirts. Now, the other factor around this is that they have another defenseman in Sweden, Nils Lundqvist, who they'd like to sign and bring over. And then obviously he's a right shot defenseman as well. Now, Lundqvist is going to be playing in Sweden for the coming season. They hold his rights until 2022, and obviously they don't want to lose out on bringing him over, but he's not going to want to sign if it doesn't look good that he's going to be able to have a good spot on the team kind of waiting for him. Obviously, he's got to go through training camp and earn that spot, but right now, if you have Trouba, Fox, as well as DeAngelo, that's going to make things difficult for him. Obviously, they could save some money, bring him in over on an ELC, and obviously, not pay DeAngelo the $5 to $6 million that he's, at this point, kind of earned with how he's played offensively the past couple of seasons. So that would put his trade value pretty high right now for a team who really needs a right shot defenseman. So obviously, that's one thing going on there with the New York Rangers. The other thing that we could look at as well is the fact that they have their number 2 center, Ryan Strome, also a restricted free agent, and there's a lot of debate on whether or not the Rangers see him as being the long-term number 2 center. He's probably, again, like most players, going to be shopping for more term and money than the Rangers might be comfortable giving him. He's had a great season this past year, but you got to remember he's playing with some pretty solid players, played a lot with Panarin, which is certainly going to impact his overall statistics. And even though Ryan Strome, I think, has progressed and being a pretty decent hockey player, again, do the Rangers want to commit to him a lot of term and money, and that could cause them to be boxed out of signing other players down the road and obviously elevating other players up into higher levels within their team. They have some terrific prospects. They're going to be looking to move up in their forward lineup here in the not too distant future. Obviously, Mika Zibanejad has done a terrific job of being the number 1 center, and he can likely be in that spot for the next while. They're not quite clear really yet if Filip Chytil's ready to be that number 2 center, but he could be the solution to that in the not too distant future as well. And like I said, there's lots of other prospects within the Rangers organization going to be looking to move up and take on bigger roles. So as the Rangers try to sort out their cap situation and maybe look for a different number 2 center other than Ryan Strome to kind of hold down that spot for the next number of years, they also have to look to the goaltending situation with Henrik Lundqvist being the final year of his contract and tying up over $8 million in their salary cap space. So still many believe, and it's referenced again in this article, that Lundqvist likely won't be back. I mean, obviously he could retire, which is unlikely, which means he leaves money on the table and they get out of his contract. I don't see that happening. There is potential that they trade him and maybe retain upwards of 50% of his salary, which still leaves him with a $4 million cap hit. Could that be a possibility? Maybe, but Lundqvist does have a no trade clause, so he has a lot of leverage in where he goes, and it's going to handcuff them to only dealing with teams that he'd accept a trade to. So again, it does make it a pretty unlikely scenario depending on how much flexibility they get from the player. And then there's always a possibility of a buyout where they would save over $5 million, I believe it is, in the first year, and then they would have a bit of some dead space next year. But they would, I believe his cap hit falls to $3 million next year if they did a buyout. So that might be the most likely scenario that we see, making Hank a free agent. Difficult to say where he goes, but at the end of the day here, we're mostly focused on Rangers cap space and what they do for their immediate future. So if they decide not to pay Ryan Strome and Tony DeAngelo, and they go out and they are able to move on from the Lundqvist contract, that's going to give them tons of flexibility, and maybe they could go out and make a significant trade, maybe even package Strome and DeAngelo together for a much stronger number 2 center. Not to say that they're going to do that. We don't have them linked to any particular players, but it makes sense that either one of those players, whether it be Strome and or DeAngelo, could possibly fetch that player, especially in the case of DeAngelo. If you look to a team that might need that top defenseman or the top 4 defenseman especially, and has that depth that they could give up a promising center, then that would obviously be a good trade match. Now, if you look around the NHL, there's quite a few teams that are going to be looking for a right shot defenseman, but obviously depending on the team, they're going to be looking for somebody who's either more offensive or more stay at home. So DeAngelo obviously can provide that offensive capabilities. Like look to a team like the Winnipeg Jets, for example, they could use him. Obviously, they're the ones that had to trade Trouba to the Rangers. So clearly, Neil Pionk went to the other way to the Rangers. Has done okay, but DeAngelo could be a fit there. But they don't have the center iceman that the Rangers would be looking for. They're in the same boat looking for a center. So, you know, from that perspective, that may not be a fit. But maybe they get another player in return to the Rangers, and then obviously maybe they do, flipping of assets, 3-way deal or anything like that. But the Rangers are going to have the first overall selection. They get Alexi Lafreniere on the way as well. They still have Kaapo Kakko, only completed his first year. So they have a lot of great wingers. They have a lot of defensemen. Their goaltending seems to be set. They really just have a couple of holes in their lineup they really need to secure long term. If they package up a couple of these players together to get a solid number 2 center, then this team could be contending as quickly as next season. So let me know your thoughts on who the Rangers should target and what kind of package deals we could be looking at down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. Now, when it comes to the Montreal Canadiens, of course, we've seen Marc Bergevin be fairly active so far in the early parts of this offseason since they've been eliminated from the 2020 NHL Stanley Cup playoffs. We saw him give up multiple picks to acquire a bit of an expensive piece in Jake Allen, but a piece that's necessary for them for right now that they can certainly afford to do. Obviously, Jake Allen's making over $4 million as a backup goalie to Carey Price, but at the end of the day, they need somebody who can give Carey Price the rest he needs and deserves, especially if the next season ends up being somewhat condensed like it's expected to be. So Obviously, short term, it's fine because Jake's only under contract for 1 more year. If they decide to keep him on beyond that, they could look at a re-signing, maybe for less money, and change things up a little bit to save some cash in that regard. Or maybe Caden Primo is ready after another year in the minors, and they go down that route instead. Either way, it's expensive, but it's short-term pain for some much-needed rest for their top goalie to get him the rest he needs to be at his best when he is between the pipes. Now, of course, we saw them also acquire big defenseman Joel Edmondson from Carolina. Of course, there's no guarantee he stays there because he is a pending unrestricted free agent. But Marc Bergevin has bought himself the right to negotiate exclusively with this potential free agent by giving up a 5th-round selection. Obviously, Edmondson is not, a big flashy defenseman. He's certainly a stay-at-home guy. He's got lots of size, can make you hard to play against. Didn't stay in Carolina too long. Of course, he was part of the St. Louis Blues Stanley Cup championship team 2 years ago. It was then moved to Carolina as a cost-cutting measure in St. Louis. And now they've got way too many defensemen in Carolina, and they're kind of doing the same sort of thing here. But Edmondson can make the Habs a tougher team to play against with that size. He brings that championship experience that he gained in St. Louis as well to the blue line. So the only thing it does is it complicates things on the left side because you've got Ben Sherratt, who's arguably their top left shot defenseman. And you've also got Brett Kulak, who's certainly improved a fair bit this year. You still got Victor Mete as well as Willette. Throw in Joel Edmondson, and you have the young, promising Alexander Romanov, who signed for next year as well. You can only have, normally 3 in your lineup at a time. So it's going to complicate things on the roster situation for next season. So now that's leading more people to speculate on what other moves Bergevin could be up to. We have articles from TVA Sports as well as the Hockey News speculating that there could be another Habs defenseman likely on the way out, assuming they can come to contract terms with Joel Edmondson. Now, it may not be a move we see right away, but is it possible that maybe a young defenseman like a Victor Mete might have kind of run out of time here with Montreal? He certainly came into the Habs organization, had a strong training camp a few years ago, went on to the World Juniors, played a big role with them as well. But it's fair to say he has struggled to find his game on a consistent basis ever since, and maybe he'll be moved out to acquire another piece for the Habs future. Difficult to say, but when you throw in, like I said, with Sherratt, Kulak, now you got Edmondson as well as Romanov, and then you throw Mete in there and Willette, there's just way too many. So more than likely somebody does get traded, but they might wait to make sure they can sign Edmondson before they go ahead and do that. So we'll see what happens, but it's fair to say Marc Bergevin has been busy, and he's certainly not done yet. Now, in regards to the Montreal Canadiens as well, there's still a lot of talk around center iceman Philip Deneau. Now, the Hockey News article I was talking about kind of references the fact that the Bergevin needs to be very careful with how he proceeds here with the trade. If indeed he does, they'll go down that road. Now, there's been a lot of talk between Deneau and Domi that one of them stays and one of them goes. Now, part of what might complicate this is the fact that Domi needs a new contract where Deneau does not. Deneau still has another year left, but his comments at the end of the year saying he wasn't real pleased with his role and how he was positioned on the team, being a third-line center, wasn't really happy with that. Given the fact that he was pretty high in Selke nomination consideration here as well, and given the fact that he's kind of regarded as one of the better two-way centers in the NHL, certainly is going to up his value, and he might be looking for more money than the Montreal Canadiens care to spend on him in a year's time when his contract expires. So obviously Bergevin's likely going to have to decide one of these players goes, one of them does not. But the article references the fact that you don't want to end up in a situation like the Buffalo Sabres did a few years ago where they had a very unhappy, really strong two-way center in Ryan O'Reilly, and they traded him for what now appears to be almost nothing. And of course, he went on to win a Stanley Cup in St. Louis, be a Conn Smythe Trophy winner, a Selke Trophy winner, just cleaned up the hardware, had a terrific year, found himself an awesome fit with his next team, and you don't want to see Deneau go on to do that with another organization, especially with the fact where they acquired him from Chicago, and they really didn't give up a whole heck of a lot to get him. I mean, that was a steal of a trade, and at the time, they may not have realized what they were getting, but, Deneau has become a pretty important piece for Montreal, and like I said, they need to be careful. That strong two-way center is not easy to come by, and even though they have a good amount of center depth in the organization now, if they go ahead and trade him and they're able to retain Domi, it's going to be a different dynamic there within the forward group within that center position. I mean, they get Kotkaniemi as well as Suzuki. Maybe one of those two is probably Kotkaniemi, could maybe be that number 3 center on a shorter term basis while he continues to work on his offensive game. Suzuki, I think, could jump into that first line spot as early as next year on a regular basis. He showed during this return to play that he's pretty much equipped and ready to take on that responsibility. I don't think many of us saw him being the number 1 center, at least not that quickly in his career, but the fact that he's evolved that much would be huge for him. Now, we'll see what happens, but either way, the Habs need to be careful with this, and it is quite likely, though, again, we have more information to suggest that a Danault or Domi trade is more and more likely, and the longer this goes on, it seems like a Danault trade might even be more likely than Domi at this point. So let me know what your thoughts are and how Bergevin should proceed with that down in the comments. Now, lastly, here I want to touch on the Columbus Blue Jackets. We have information from TSN insider Darren Dreger talking about the fact that a potential RFA here, Josh Anderson, wants to stay in Columbus and he'd like to sign a long-term deal. Now, it's always interesting. Darren Dreger always seems to get the most up-to-date, most inside information from clients of Darren Ferris. Of course, Ferris also represents Mitch Marner. Dreger always seemed to have the inside scoop on when negotiations and when that was ongoing. Now the same thing here goes for Anderson. Of course, Anderson had some pretty contentious contract negotiations with the Blue Jackets in the past, with at one point Ferris threatening that Anderson would go play in Switzerland, which we've seen that story before pretty much with all of his clients at one point in time. Now, you can't help but think that Anderson doesn't have a ton of leverage in this scenario, given the fact that he missed a lot of last season with an injury, another shoulder injury, which obviously kept him out through the entire playoff run as well. So, obviously that's not going to bode well for having your side have a lot of sway in the negotiations. But Anderson, apparently through Dreger here, has made it known that he wants to sign with Columbus and stay long term, which might be too difficult for them to do. I mean, the Columbus Blue Jackets are a team who are in a position where they have some cap flexibility, but they also have some other glaring needs on their team. They certainly need help at the center position, and with their winger depth is pretty decent right now. But obviously Josh Anderson could be a type of player that they trade to get that top center to play along with Pierre-Luc Dubois in the top six and really balance things out for them. So could Josh Anderson bounce back and be that 25 to 30 goal scorer who's got that big size and potential power forward for Columbus or another team? It certainly could be. But are they going to take the chance and sign a long-term contract with a player coming off injury? They could go through the arbitration process because he does have arbitration rights. And if he signs a one-year deal, that he could be walked right into unrestricted free agency next year, and he could walk for nothing and kind of go find his own deal with another team afterwards. So certainly some risk involved here for Columbus. So he's been a player that's been mentioned off and on in the trade rumor mill, and it wouldn't be surprising if Jarmo Kekalainen does decide to move on from Anderson if he can find the right deal coming back, especially if he can find that solid number 2 center to work behind Pierre-Luc Dubois in their lineup to kind of balance things out better. As they discovered as the playoffs went on, that's certainly one of the biggest holes on the team. Now, they're also rumored to be moving a goaltender, so there's always a possibility of a package deal with Anderson maybe being packaged with either Korpisalo or Elvis Merzlikins to maybe bring back a higher profile player as well. So let me know your thoughts. How should Columbus proceed here? Should Anderson be signed long-term? Do they trade him? If so, what kind of package deals do you see going on to help them bring back somebody to help them for the future? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.